seem as a classical session, but in fact, we are working on those issues since months with Aidan White. Aidan White will be the moderator of this session. He will introduce himself, but so not my tasks. But we are working at GEN from the beginning on this idea of coalition for ethical journalism, and this session is the first milestone of a 2-year program. So it is not at all a session as another session. It's really involving months and months of work, of discussion. And so we will ask people to come for listening to this session. Aidan, you have the floor. The handheld microphone? They will come. They will come. If you could, there's the microphone. Is this one working?
Hello, everyone. It works. Good. Look, I'm going to make a start, and I'm going to, as I talk, I'm going to hope this room is going to fill up with people, and which I think will be really essential. This is not going to be a discussion about technology. We're not going to talk about something which is massively innovative, something that's going to be hot, something that's actually going to deliver more quickly, more efficiently, the products that you've got. We're not going to be talking about any of the exciting stuff that you've been hearing about in the last 2 days. We're going to be talking about something which is actually something everyone in this room has an opinion about, understands, and sees as important, which is why this is a session which is going to be much more about hearing from you about what you think about the critical issue that's under discussion here. And really, what is that issue? To a certain extent, I think it was touched upon by Julian Assange yesterday, when in his analysis, which was really powerful, but in my view, incorrect and distorted in some respects, but which had an element of truth about it, which is enough to cause concern to anyone who worries about quality in terms of information and how information is used. And that is really, how do we, and the question that's posed is, how do we, in the context of an open information environment, when journalism is no longer the single force that arbitrates access to information, sets the agenda for public discussion, but the audience is part of the process. How do we reinvigorate, restore, and maintain commitment to standards and values and ethics? To talk about that means that we begin from a standpoint in which we understand that journalism, by its very name, is a distinctive form of information and content. That is to say, it's information and content which is shaped and framed according to a set of values. Unlike bloggers or others who open up their computer, switch it on, and they use the internet to exercise their freedom of expression, journalists cannot express themselves and do not express themselves without restraint. A blogger, or anyone using the internet, they can say what they want, how they want, when they want. They can lie, they can be dishonest, they can be indecent, they can, without any respect for the community at large, they can make themselves accountable, or they can remain anonymous. Journalism is about information which is produced in a completely different framework, and that's a framework of values. And it's according to what you might call a basic set of ethical principles. Now, part of this discussion we're going to have today is about what do we mean by ethics of journalism in an open information environment, in an environment in which there are many new players in the world of media, in the world of journalism, and how do we restore a sense of responsibility and quality in the work that's produced. It's not about a discussion about framing or adopting here today or tomorrow a new code of ethics. There are many codes of ethics. At the last count, around 400. I always used to say I could wallpaper my office with codes of ethics, statements of aspirations of the people wanting to do well in journalism. And they come from different traditions and different media representative groups and so on and so forth. But essentially, they boil down to 4 or 5 key principles. 1, truth-telling. Always try to tell the truth. 2, be independent and impartial. That is, don't be a spokesman for the government, don't be a spokesman for the corporation, don't be a spokesman for a special interest group. Be yourself, be independent. 3, do no harm. Understand that what you produce has an impact. The choice of this picture over that picture, this video over that video, this headline over that headline, this word over that word. These are editorial choices which are made, journalistic choices which are made and which have an impact. 4thly, be accountable. As a journalist, you're responsible for what you do and you make yourself accountable to your audience. And 5thly, I add this one because I think it's important, you should express solidarity with the people and the industry in which you're working. That is to say, people in journalism support one another and should support one another because what they do is for a public good, that there is a wider responsibility beyond the simple, venal, narcissistic idea of ego and using information as a reflection only of ego, that it's more than that. So this is the issue. How do we, in the open information environment, define and adopt a new approach? One is that is multi-platform, one that recognizes the new audience, which is extensive and pluralistic and diverse. How do we have that debate? Later on in this discussion, we will see the role that the Global Editors Network is going to play, and I hope play an important role in taking this debate forward and providing leadership in generating an important discussion about the future of responsible and reliable journalism. And to start this conversation off, I've got a large panel, but a large panel which actually contains enormously expert and talented people from different parts of the industry who are going to answer very simple questions. We're not going to have long presentations. This will be the longest speech you'll hear, and there's enough people in the audience. We can now turn to the panel. I want to thank them for coming along and having the discussion. We've got here Cliff Buddle, François Dufour, Tom Kent, Aroon Purie, Adriaan Stoop, and Bambang Harymurti. All of them, I'll introduce them when I pose the question, are people who have got something to say. More importantly, they will speak briefly and then the audience is going to participate because we want to hear very much from you. So I'm going to straight away go to Cliff Buddle from the South China Morning Post, its acting editor-in-chief. Cliff, we say here after the News of the World. We all know what happened at the News of the World. The News of the World was a scandal which revealed the impact that a corrupt corporate culture inside media, how it can damage the role of media. And although I am profoundly depressed by what was revealed at the News of the World and inside News Corporation, I am profoundly cheered by the fact that it was dogged, persistent, and very professional journalism which was responsible for exposing it, because it would not have been exposed by the police, it would not have been exposed by the regulator, it would not have been exposed by government. It took journalists themselves to expose it. So after the News of the World, Rupert Murdoch didn't intend it, but as a result of what happened in the News of the World, he has, for the first time in a generation, opened up a serious debate about the role and responsibility of journalism and the modern media. So there's a big debate taking place now in London about not just the News of the World and News Corporation, but actually about the whole of the press and the role of the press. I've been very interested to know, how's that playing out here in Hong Kong, and what are the implications for journalism here?
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Aidan. We in Hong Kong, like much of the world, watched events unfolding in the UK with great interest and reported on them with great interest too. We particularly enjoyed the intervention of Wendy Deng when the Murdochs were giving their testimony in Parliament. That was broadcast live in the Foreign Correspondents Club over here, and there was a good turnout that night. But of course, the implications of what has happened and what is going on now with the Leveson inquiry have been felt by journalists around the world, and Hong Kong is no exception. There has been some soul-searching here, but I feel there is perhaps a need for some more. In recent times, we have been focusing more on standing up for our press freedom here, which of course is absolutely right and something which is very important. But of course, press freedom is at its most vulnerable when it has been abused, and we're seeing that very much in London now. In Hong Kong, we have had scandals in the past, not so much with phone hacking, but with photographs of celebrities, invasions of privacy, and there have been occasions when there's been a public outcry, one publication closed as a result of it. And whenever that happens, we get the calls for more regulation, we get calls for new laws to control the media, and that always causes us great concern. So the position that we're in Hong Kong, when these calls have been made, the industry here responded by establishing a press council which works on a voluntary self-regulating basis. There have been proposals put forward by our Law Reform Commission here for a statutory press council on two different occasions. The first proposal would have created a body in which the government had considerable influence over the people appointed, and that press council would have been able to impose quite substantial fines. That was not adopted. The self-regulation model was followed. But there have since been other proposals put forward, again for a statutory body, very carefully thought through proposals, also for new laws protecting privacy, which would have had a significant impact on the media. I think the concerns here about protecting press freedom and the vigilance with which the media seeks to defend it have ultimately led to these proposals not going forward. And what we're left with is with a press council which doesn't have much in the way of teeth. And the concern is that if another scandal comes along, particularly in the wake of the news of the world and events in the UK, those that would like to see the media subjected to much more stringent controls will step up again, and those pressures will return. So I think it's very important that we recognise that it's in our interests to maintain high standards, and whether it's through a global initiative, such as the one that Jen is looking at, or within our own jurisdictions and our own organisations, we do need to strive for those high standards. I would just like to finish by picking up on Aidan's point. The Chinese state media here had a little bit of fun with the News of the World scandal, arguing that this was clear evidence that the perceived Western approach to media freedom had failed. But as Aidan has said, it wasn't the police that uncovered this. It wasn't the Press Complaints Authority. It was hard-working, dedicated, courageous journalists. So I think this was a victory in the end for press freedom, not the reverse.
Thanks very much. I mean, I think that's right. The point that is being made here is a clear one, and I agree with you that governments around the world are using this moment to try to move and introduce new legislation. Only in the last few days, I was in Hungary a few days ago with an international delegation where the government said quite clearly in the discussions we had with them, what happened at the News of the World reveals how it's necessary for us to intervene because self-regulation doesn't work. In South Africa, the authorities also justified a reference to the Murdoch case in justifying the media law. So, François Dufour, you're a Gen board member. The question is here, self-regulation is under attack. Governments are moving in to fill what they would regard as a vacuum in terms of responsibility. I mean, how do we in journalism actually respond to that by making ourselves more responsible?
Well, I think the ethics should be one of the pillars of what the GEN could be, because GEN is a new organization and there is no other organization, journalists organizations in the world really embracing that subject and defending that subject. And obviously, everybody in the room will agree that there is no good journalism without good content, and there is no good content without good ethics or good standards or good principles. So what I've tried to do is, because as you said, there is something like 500 code of ethics within regions, countries, companies, groups, etc. So I've tried to do something simple, or some friends would say simplistic, and try to take the heart of what I thought every journalist in the room would agree. I can tell you that not every journalist in the room will agree, but maybe Antoine, would you like to show the 10? So, yeah, the 10 commandments. Thank you. It's now putting me even more into trouble. So I'm not going to go through it, but I think there is something to do with the basic principles I'm sure we are all not far from. That's very nuanced in my words. So, of course, in my dream, it would be okay. I am a member of GEN, so I sign those 10 principles. In my lower dream, as a board member of GEN, I would sign those 10 principles. And in my realistic life, I don't know, maybe the principles could be put on the GEN website and a forum be opened, and so that everybody could say, okay, yes, no, why not, etc. So that's the proposal. And I am also proposing to my friends from the board that besides the Data Journalism Awards, we create Journalism Ethical Awards if we think that GEN should be an advocate of those principles. But having said all that, please keep in mind that the press as a whole has done an awful job in maybe one of the most important stories of the last decade, which is the war in Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction. So this should not be forgotten. And if we take the big stories of this year, have we done a great job? Have we really separated facts and opinions? Principle number 3, covering the Fukushima accident. I heard some people yesterday saying that Fukushima is a catastrophe. Is catastrophe an opinion? I'm sort of an expert on the Strauss-Kahn case for a crazy reason. I was in New York that day, so I've become a DS-colog, an expert on the case. I could tell you many examples all over the world proving that the press was not very ethical. So, I mean, there is a problem to address. I'm trying to help. That's
okay.
all. But let's not say that there is no problem. And of course, privacy is respected. Number 6, news of the world.
Okay, look, that's great. Privacy is respected sometimes. Always? Everyone? Differences? Every single question related to privacy is subject itself to analysis according to the individual cases. And we have to sort of work out, when we say privacy is respected, that's just one of the big issues that we actually have to deal with, which is not so simple as merely putting it down on paper and saying it's respected. The words that we use are very difficult. I'll give you an example. Years and years ago, when I first entered in the field of international journalism, you were unable to use the word responsibility when you ever were talking about journalism and media, because if you used the word responsibility, it was taken as a code word to give governments the right to interfere and control media under the New World Information and Communication Order, which was then the subject of a great debate 30 years ago within UNESCO. So one has to be very careful about the words we use and how they can be interpreted and how they are therefore put into effect. So I'm very glad actually that these days I can use the word responsibility without actually feeling that it's a dirty word and it's going to open the door to all sorts of terrible things. Which is actually brings me to Tom Kent. You're the standards editor, the man responsible at the Associated Press. And I want to sort of move it on to the new environment that we're in, that is now beyond just journalists in terms of how information is dealt with. And someone said something yesterday which I really liked, which said, ethical journalism is thinking journalism. But what if you don't have time to think? And almost everything we've heard about getting information out in a new and improved manner reduces the time to think in terms of actually how you monitor that content and make sure it's the right sort of content. So how do we adjust to the new information environment that we're in?
I think that there's time to think. I would be very wary of a situation where we say that it's just so urgent that just put it out. I think it's a dangerous situation.
But isn't there pressure to do that?
I think there's pressure to do that, and I think that we have to resist it. I have no problem with it. The different news organizations are different, but I think in the DNA of my organization, and I think in the DNA of the organizations of most of the people here, we're prepared to wait a few minutes. We are used to situations where everybody is reporting something and we're not. And we've taken actually to sending out little notes to our subscribers saying, we are aware of reports that are such and such. However, we're checking them. We would have had Gaddafi captured or killed 3 or 4 times if we had followed every time that everyone said that he'd been captured or killed. So we're pretty comfortable with it. We do lose the play, as we say sometimes, because people will set up another agency's report and be ready to use the other agency's report, and then we'll confirm it, and they'll say, okay, then they use the other agency's report. So that happens. But we're comfortable enough with the situation.
I just wanted to very quickly take you to, there was a bit of controversy a few days ago over the fact that Associated Press put out a restriction, I think, or restricted circumstances in which its reporters can Twitter. Why was that?
We did have a petit scandale about 2 weeks ago. What happened was that at the Occupy Wall Street protest in New York, a couple of our reporters disappeared. Perhaps seized by the authorities. We didn't know what had happened to them. I think most of the professionals in this room know that about the worst thing that can happen is one of your reporters disappearing, 2 in our case. And that when that happens, what you have to do is to make a strategic decision. Sometimes the right thing to do is to say nothing, work it out very quietly, get the people out. Sometimes the right thing to do is to scream bloody murder and do as much publicity as you can. In this situation, we were in the position of making that decision. We were in the middle of that decision when some AP staffers tweeted that these people had been arrested. We did not consider this a competitive news situation. We considered this a question of the welfare of our people, and we told them to cut it out. And we feel comfortable enough with that, absolutely. You also raised earlier the question of, and this has come up also in discussion, about whether AP reporters should tweet the news as soon as they get it, or they should leave it, put it on the wires first and only tweet it afterward. And it's come up with regarding a number of agencies, a number of situations. We get it. We know that the world of Twitter means moving information fast, and we tweet a lot. We tweet, it seems, nonstop, announcements, news events, and so forth. But when we do have something that's exclusive, we feel kind of an obligation to the people who support AP. The AP, as you know, it's not a profit-making news company. It's a not-for-profit cooperative. We're actually very good at not making a profit. And we think that if we get something exclusive, we owe it to the people who believe in us and support us to get it out to them earlier. So that's our approach.
Thanks very much indeed. I now want to move on to Aroon Purie, who's the editor-in-chief and publisher of India Today. India's in the glorious position of being a country where there's no crisis for media. There's an explosion of media, all sorts of different media in different platforms. The media economy is expanding, but it's difficult to say that the media economy is expanding in terms of responsible journalism. There are serious problems regarding sort of the quality of journalism, and there are serious ethical issues being arising in India. Aroon, you're a publisher, but also a sort of a market leader in terms of sort of the journalism you produce. I mean, how do you, in a situation where there is such an extensive market being created, that a lot of which is irresponsible, how do you get organizations to take the notion of media responsibility seriously?
Firstly, I'd disagree with you to say that there has not been that widespread irresponsibility what you're talking about. The print media in India is very mature. It's been around for a long time, and they've got traditions of good journalistic practice, which they do. So I don't think that there's any problem in the print industry as such. And I'm one of those old-fashioned people who actually believe that journalism is a noble profession, that there is a code of ethics, there is a responsibility. It's like being a doctor or being a teacher, that you're something more than just earning a living. And I think that people who join journalism in India have had that background, in the sense that they understand that there are certain ethical practices which have to be followed. What has happened in India recently is the fact that there has been a massive growth of 24-hour news channels. There are, in fact, I think probably the largest in any country. There are about 85 24-hour news channels. And they're competing with each other. This is a profession which is hardly 10, 15 years old in India. So lots of young people have come in, not with the background of print, and they're competing with each other, so they're very quick on the draw of carrying news and not verifying it properly. And there have been occasions where this has led to mistakes. Right? But on the whole, I must say that the media has been a force for the good rather than an evil force in India. It has held politicians accountable, it has held government accountable, it has brought in great amount of transparency in governance, and this is a good thing. So, and I'd like to say that bringing in government regulation, which seems to be the kind of moves which are being talked about, well, in India too, as in other parts of the world, that this cure is going to be worse than the disease. So I think that should be put aside as far as I'm concerned. The benefits of a free press and an open society are far outweigh any transgressions the free press may have made in India. So I think that's an important point to make. Second is, yes, there should be self-regulation, because the media should look at itself, should turn the mirror on itself, and see what best can be done in order to name and shame each other in terms of doing any such transgressions. And there is progress on this front. The broadcasters, there's a National News Broadcasters Association, which has in fact set up a redressal and grievance committee headed by a former Chief Justice. He works independently, people can complain, and he takes action. People who are members of this association are obliged to carry out whatever punishment or redressal he recommends. The problem is that not everybody is part of this association. Right? So I think that there are certain things the government can do in terms of more transparency, in terms of ownership, more transparency, norms in terms of one is ownership, the other is any questions about accountability. And we always seem to forget that there are laws in a country which hold media responsible. There's obscenity laws, there are defamation laws, and in our country, there are even laws against reporting on communal violence. That is, you cannot name religious communities in the risk that there may be sectarian violence. So
But the question, I mean, I agree with that, and I think that that whole question of the application of general laws itself acts as a restraint. But the question is, the real question is how do we make self-regulation more effective?
I think it's a work in progress. I mean, it's the fact that you recognize that self-regulation is required and some mechanism has already been set up. That's a beginning, and through public pressure, through pressure within your own peers, that is something which was never there before. The print doesn't have it. I mean, we have a press council in India, whose chairman is here. But again, it's a recommendatory body, and that's sort of works outside the press.
Okay, thanks very much. Look, I want to move on and bring in Adriaan Stoop, who's a board member from the Foundation for Democracy and Media in the Netherlands, a non-journalist and a lawyer, but an activist, absolutely, on this particular question. You're the non-journalist on this panel, Adriaan, and I think your perspective is, let's put it as this, a sort of concerned member of the public. I mean, what do you think the challenges are facing media in the new information environment, and journalists in particular?
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm not just a concerned member of the public, that's true. In that sense, I'm also an activist. But I'm also a board member of a foundation which is a media owner, and which is a non-profit organization which is aimed at funding and promoting pluriform media in a democratic society. So I look at it very much, and when I hear you journalists speak about this, I look at it very much from that perspective as to what would we support and what would we be doing and who would we be willing to work with and do something with. I think that the greatest challenge that we see now for journalism is actually, and then I have to take a step back, actually is in the role of journalism in a democratic rule of law, in an open society. The point is that to have a good democratic rule of law, good journalism is absolutely crucial. It is something, it's an element which you cannot miss. That seems like an open door. But in the West, it is no longer an open door. It's not in Holland, it's not in the United States, it's not in many countries. Especially the public doesn't understand, but also many journalists don't see this anymore. And many journalists nowadays say, I've heard people from respectable newspapers in Holland who said, I'm now a pass-through of information, which I think, yes, you are also that, but you're also other things as a good journalist. And so what we see very much is that where this role of journalism is actually not taken up seriously, or not taken serious enough by many media. And of course, there are very good ones, like Thomas just said. But the point is, like in cowboy movies, there are always a few good guys and many, many bad guys, you know? Otherwise, it's no fun to watch it. And that's the same a bit in media. There's a couple of very good media, but there are many, many bad ones. And what it does is it affects our public debate in a horrible way, so that we are talking all the time about, on the basis of rhetorics and images, and much less and less on the basis of information and arguments. What we see so that is a challenge for society, but also a challenge for journalism to keep that role that it usually had and that it should have in the future, to actually be crucial in society. And even if it loses that role, then it also loses its relevance and importance. So I think that what we see as the main challenge for journalism is to make sure that there is going to be sustainable, quality journalism in the future. And to do that, I would say you have to look at what is the added value of journalism. And the added value of journalism over Twitter, social media, and all kinds of other things, which can be forms of journalism, but which not necessarily are. The added value of journalism is, I would say, in 3 main points you can catch it. It is 1, independence, 2, credibility, and 3, skill. Those are the 3 things which, by the way, also count for me as a lawyer, but they also count for you as journalists. Those are the main elements. And there is a big threat at this moment in the sense that there are governments like Cameroon immediately after Murdoch, and in Hungary and in other places, who are, of course, with these technological developments, feeling an upcoming need more and more to regulate the media. And I think that is a very dangerous aspect, of course. That's something that we should not want. So probably, if you do not decide to do it yourself, and I very much support the points of François and Aroon. If you do not decide to do it yourself, one way or another, this kind of regulation, then somebody else is going to do it. And that's the last thing that you want.
Thanks very much indeed. I mean, I think that sort of outlines, for us in this discussion about the big question that comes up after this meeting is, what are we in practical terms going to do? And I know you're involved in that discussion. I think it's very important. I want to bring in Bambang Harymurti if I can. Bambang, it's great to have you here. On this panel, you're someone who's not just a journalist, editor-in-chief of Tempo, the Tempo Group in Indonesia. You yourself have actually lived and worked as a journalist and fought for the sort of rights of independent journalists and paid the price for it in Indonesia during years of dictatorship and so on. But you're also a member of a press council. And I'm very interested in the questions that have been put here because of the various issues that have been arisen here. We know that in the United Kingdom, the Press Council or the Press Complaints Commission has demonstrated its lamentable capacity to actually self-regulate. In India, there's a question over the sort of the capacity of the Press Council to work and so on. What makes what's happening in Indonesia different that it could in some way inspire the thought that a self-regulating process like that does have a future?
Thank you, Adriaan. That's very generous introductions. I think Indonesia has experienced different kind of press councils, and there are many kind of press councils in the world. And we start first with the worst kind of press council, which was actually headed by, ex officio by the Minister of Information, which will be automatically the head of press council. So it's become like a stamp for the government if they want to repress the media. And I think unfortunately, there are still some countries still following this state-owned press council. But when we had a reform in '98, we learned from this mistake. So the first thing we want to have is the independent press council. And we look at all the models in the world. And actually, the antithesis of the state-owned press council is the industry-owned press council, such as in Netherlands or in Australia, in Britain, which basically cater more toward the media industry interests. And so since this is not representing, the press council was not supposed to defend the press, but to defend the freedom of the press. And the freedom of the press belong not only to the journalists, but actually belong to the public. And in fact, unethical journalist is a threat to freedom of the press. And therefore, in Indonesia, it's the press council is considered a civil society press council. So, for instance, we have an internal regulation that somebody from a journalism background shouldn't be elected to the chair. It should be someone from the civil society, even though we have journalists represented in it. And I think it has been good because then the people want to go to complain about the press to the press council because they feel this is more a natural ground, not automatically will defend the press. And it can be seen in 2003, it received only 101 complaints, but last year we have 5 times more than 5 times of that. And quite interesting that last year was actually a good year for journalists because only 80% of the complaints we find fault with the journalists. Years before, usually it's more than 90%. We find that the journalist has breached some sort of code of ethics. But it has been accepted by the media because also for the media, it is better that if you breach your code of ethics, then there is a remedy which is also regulated by the code of ethics, which is in the end, when we have this problem, who are the victims? The victims are the public. If a journalist produce a news that is not the truth, he had already committed a very grave mistake. But of course, someone can provide this information following the code of ethics, but still it's wrong information. That's fine because we say, look, if every surgeon's doctor, they have to do surgery, the patient has to be healed and become healthy again. If the patient dies, then the doctor goes to jail. Nobody wants to become a surgery, and that will be very bad for the people because if nobody wants to be a surgeon or surgery becomes very expensive, only super rich people can afford it, many people will die for a very small thing that with just a small surgery can relieve them. So this is the analog we tell to the people. Look, of course, journalism has sometimes you have to pay the price of having a freedom of the press. The press might make mistake, but the standard should be that when the press made this mistake, was it malicious intent? They know that it was wrong, but they still do it, or is it because the risk of the profession? So it's very important that society have that understanding, and also that the journalist itself has this understanding, because then our motto is very simple. A good journalist or a good media is not a journalist or a media that never made a mistake. But when they make a mistake, without even anybody complain, the first thing they do is they make correction, they tell that they made a mistake to the public, because that is the sanctity of the contract between a journalist and the public, that when I write something or I report something, at that time I report or I write what I truly believe is the truth. And if later on I found that I made a mistake, then I should quickly correct it and tell the people, this is the truth. Only when the people have the truth, then democracy can work. Because no matter how smart a society, if you give them bad information, they will make bad decisions. So this is very important.
Thank you very much. Just on the Press Council in, one quick question. On the Press Council in Indonesia, does it cover journalistic content on all platforms?
Yes, we cover our platform, even though we have what we call broadcast regulators, also an independent body, but they refer on journalism ethic cases to the Press Council. Because they have too much work already on handling complaints on non-journalism
technical
problem.
Yeah.
Many entertainment, they don't want to be considered journalists because they are paid program and so on. So they are already busy with that.
Right. I want to throw this open now, but I mean, I'm just quickly looking. Anyone want to respond to something that they've heard here? I'm sure you do. You want to say something? Tom, yeah.
I'd just like to make one comment, and that is that I think there's a lot of, every country's different, and I think there's a lot of virtue to press organizations in individual countries deciding to create voluntary associations and councils and boards. I think you have to ask, though, how many more steps do you want to take? Do you want to take steps to compel every news organization in a country to join a council? To compel, I guess, would mean you would shut them down otherwise, or you would fine them, or I don't know. I mean, would you use coercion or not? I also wonder a little bit if there's some question here about where, you know, how we're setting our compass in this conversation. If we set our compass from the standpoint of people in relatively democratic countries, and most of the people in this room are from relatively democratic countries, then sure, you know, I think we can all agree on basic principles, on François' principles, on the SPJ principles, and so forth. But imagine some of these principles and the ideas of press councils falling into other hands. Let's look at the other half of the world.
I think that's a good point. I mean, the answer to your point about, coercion and so on, is that we are not an organization which is built on coercion. We're a journalistic organization. We're open. We want to be inclusive. We want to sort of have voluntary principles. We want to have people willingly themselves to subscribe to values and to actually put them into effect. Now, the point you make is an absolutely right one. There is no one-size-fits-all because the situation is different in various countries. In some of the countries represented in this room, the conditions and environment for journalism and independent journalism hardly exists at all. Journalists operate on almost twilight existence in terms of their capacity just to get access to official information, just to navigate through sort of completely corrupt structures in which government operates and which society operates. That's true. So there is a battle to create conditions in order for journalism to function. But that does not exclude the need for those in journalism who are able to do it, applying self-restraint and responsibility in the way that they use information. So that's the question that we're looking at here, not about launching a campaign, which we should always be in favor of creating the best environment for the legal conditions in which journalists operate and so on and so forth. What we're interested in is how do we, inside journalism, no matter which platform we're working on, if the information is going to be available for public consumption, how do we try to make sure that the person producing the information, the person editing the information, and the person responsible for putting it out has got a sense that they're doing something as part of a public responsibility, that there are values attached to the information they're putting out and that they have to be responsible for it. That's the challenge, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to be launching the Coalition for Ethical Journalism here, because it's a big debate about how we do that. So I'm now interested to hear what any of you have got to say about this conversation in general, but to put points to the panel, and quickly, Adriaan.
Yeah, just quickly, if I may. I think, first of all, that the interesting thing about self-regulation is that it is an indication for legal practice in civil courts. It's the same with doctors and with lawyers. If you are considered to be breaking your ethical code, this can mean that in a civil court you are in an entirely different position. That's the strength, actually, of the regulation. You don't need to have a council that can close down media outlets. Second thing. Yes, of course, I very much share the concern of Tom that you have to be very careful with countries that can abuse things. But let's be fair. In any country where there is a dictatorial regime or an autocratic regime, they will use any means to close a media. They don't need that code. I mean, we were financing through the Media Development Loan Fund a newspaper in Moscow. I think they've been closed down for fire regulations, for tax. I mean, it's the same like Ai Weiwei in China. You know, he's now picked up for pornography. I mean, these regimes really don't need that kind of code to do that. So if you would see that as a risk, yeah, then you can't put anything there.
Okay, who would like to join? One there, and one there, and one there. The first three. Okay. Do we have a microphone? I want to get in, and one there. I want to get in as many as possible, please, and we've only got about 10 minutes, so...
Thank you, Adriaan. My name is Yopi from Indonesia. After about 13 years embarking into the transformed political environment, now we are enjoying a quite vibrant democracy. The problem now is everybody realize how important the media role is in a direct political environment where people vote directly for the president. So what happened in the last 3 years, you will see that there are so many new media institutions emerge. Nobody in the right mind, no businessman in the right mind will set up a new newspaper right now, anywhere in the world, probably, you know, because the business side, the commercial side will not be feasible. But if you see into the media industry landscape in Indonesia, there are so many new news organizations. Last year, one tycoon just acquired a portal news for $60 million US, which is, that portal is basically not really making money. So I want to dig more comments on from the panelists here, how to deal with this, because now the society, the civil society realized that this is a big danger, that all the media, the main public opinion makers, controlled by all the businessmen come politician behind. That will be a big danger to democracy. How to cope with this?
So that's the threat of the business environment, actually, to standards. Let's have some other questions, please. There was there, and then there's one there, and there's there. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question. Now, I noticed that contrary to Mr. François Dufour's rule number 1 of his 10-point rule, Mr. Purie holds the enviable title of editor-in-chief and founder and publisher of India Today. So I'm wondering how Mr. Purie reconciles these two conflicting roles.
Life is full of conflicts. Yes, there was there and there. I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond. Yes, over here. Very quickly.
I'd introduced myself yesterday. I was a judge of the Supreme Court of India. I retired in September. In October, I became the chairman of Press Council of India. 1 or 2 days after I became chairman of Press Council of India, I invited all the media people, including electronic media, to my house, and I said, let's have a get-together every 2 months. We'll discuss all media issues in a democratic method, that is the method of discussions, dialogue, persuasion. But I said I have certain criticism against the media. There's so much commercialization. There's a phenomenon called paid news, which means in the elections, first the journalist used to go to the candidate and say, you give me 20,000 rupees, I will publish news in your favor, that you are winning by a thumping majority. Then the proprietors realized that they got the wise idea, why should these journalists make this money? Why should I not make this money? So they went with packages. You give me $200,000 and I'll give you a package. And astounding things happened in India. On the front page of a newspaper, it was published that candidate A was winning by a thumping majority. And on the same front page, on the lower part, the rival candidate had paid, and it was mentioned candidate A is losing by a thumping majority. So ridiculous things were happening. And when I raised my voice, a furious outcry was raised that I want to muzzle the media, I want to gag them. I said, look, I don't want government control over the media. I want control by an independent statutory authority. You don't have a right to do. Every freedom is coupled with responsibilities. There is no such thing as absolute freedom. Every freedom is subject to reasonable restriction in the public interest. You have to behave in a manner which is, don't say that I have a right to do anything I like, I can destroy society, I can smash society, I can ruin. No. Your profit, nothing wrong in making money.
Okay.
But money making must be coupled with social responsibilities, otherwise you are heading for big trouble.
Okay, thanks. There and then there. Yes, very quickly.
It was great that journalists uncovered what happened in the Murdoch empire, but everyone noticed that not a single journalist from the Murdoch empire came out and was a whistleblower. I mean, the mafia is envious of the conspiracy of silence inside the empire. So if we are to regulate ourselves, and the most insidious power inside journalism is self-censorship about anything, and we're not talking about ethics, the Murdoch case has criminal sides, we have to find a mechanism that enables whistleblowers from inside journalistic organizations to be able to talk and come out, because otherwise this omerta will go on. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. I mean, I should correct you. There was one journalist who did say I spoke to the New York Times and unfortunately was vilified for his effort in who used to work for the News of the World and so on. Yes.
Hi, this is Wendy. I'm previously with CNN. I have a question for everyone, especially for Tom. If you work for news organizations that the bread and butter is breaking news, under what situation would you wait to report that news? And under what situation would you go with it? Let's say if you hear from two reputable sources from another news outlet, say like New York Times or Washington Post.
You mean if the New York, would we pick up something from the New York Times or the Washington Post?
Would you attribute them, yeah?
Whenever we do sometimes pick up things from other organizations, but our question always is, what is their source? And if their source is anonymous or their source is dodgy, then we wouldn't. If someone makes a statement to the New York Times, we would probably pick it up. But we don't feel that we can substitute someone else's news judgment for ours. We would have to have reason to believe the other organization was correct.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. There, and then at the right at the back, the President. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Nikhil from Burson Mastella, India. In your opening remarks, you made a distinction between journalists and bloggers, and then you went on to explain that a journalist is defined by a code of values. So if a blogger who is a non-journalist were to live by that code of values that you laid out, wouldn't he or she then qualify in a way as a journalist? And the second part to that is, if a individual who is currently referred to as a journalist in his personal capacity blogs, how does that get treated? I mean, the lines seem very blurred.
Look, absolutely. I'm not in the business of defining who's a journalist and who's not a journalist. That's the most dangerous thing to do. I've only worked as a journalist for more than 40 years, and I still don't know actually how to adequately describe them. So I don't get into that business. My view is whoever is putting out information, and they do so in a framework of values, they do so believing that they're making a contribution to the public interest, they deserve as much protection as anyone who's actually working for a news organization and calls themselves with a fancy title of journalist and so on. So I think we have to be very, very clear that we're talking about responsibility across the whole information environment. Journalism is an important part of it. But we live in a different world where the open information environment means that the audience is very much part of this process, as we've heard over the last 2 days. So this is not just a question about responsibility in the use of information inside journalism, although that is a primary concern of those of us who work in the business, and it is the major driving force for information that's available to the public and so on. It's also a question of promoting standards and quality and responsibility at all levels in which information is used. So I think that's quite important. The question of journalists blogging and so on, that's a matter for news organizations themselves to work out their own policies, and as we heard from Tom, sometimes that is something that's a matter that needs to be further looked at. François?
Yes, the problem with the word journalist is that you have on one side reporters taking care of facts, and on the other side you have commentarists or editorialists or opinionists or columnists, and they take, or blogists or bloggers or some bloggers, and they take care of opinions. So a journalist is to be defined a little more.
Okay. That's work in progress. I'm quite happy to take another 40 years to do that. Javier, yeah.
This is a short question for Tom. In your view, till which point the obsolescence of the self-regulating systems and of the most of the ethics codes are due to the change operated in the landscape, and the fact that all these systems were created in print landscape, and we are now mostly in an online landscape.
So the question is, how do ethics codes created in the traditional landscape play in the online landscape? I would say that they largely play exactly the same way. Our ethics codes, and I think the codes of most organizations, are pretty much the same for what we do online. I don't think we can say, just because it's online, well, who cares you know, we do not have a different standard. Some other organizations have a little different view, but we feel very strongly the same principles apply. We think that that one thing that's changed in the landscape is, of course, the existence of bloggers, and bloggers do play a very important role in press coverage in a lot of countries, especially countries where there's not really a free press. And we're very interested, as we probably all are, in helping to protect those bloggers and not providing tools that can be used against them.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm sorry, we've actually come to the end of the discussion. I just want to say a couple of words in wrapping this up, to say part of the process that we've been involved in here is we are, at this Gen meeting, we're launching something called the Coalition for Ethical Journalism. And it's an attempt to promote, and it will promote, a new debate, a fresh debate inside journalism across all platforms about the whole question of responsibility, the application of standards, and how we see in a completely different and changed environment what structures are necessary, what works best, and how we see the future being developed. And we're going to be developing a program which will allow for the most extensive and inclusive debate, and will not be, although Jen will provide leadership, it's actually going to be a debate in which we are going to bring in partners from the online industry, from the print and publishing industry, from broadcasting and so on, so that it is an absolutely across all sectors, and it'll be a very important debate. So you're going to hear more about the Coalition for Ethical Journalism in the coming days. I've also got here some basic websites. If you're interested in the question of standards and how things are being developed already, some of these websites actually contain very, very useful information about structures and various forms of forms of regulation that are being put together. I think it's going to be a really exciting period for journalism on the technology front, but I think it's going to be equally exciting and important on the content front, in defining areas of responsibility and actually how we reinvigorate the whole notion of mission in journalism. I think it's a great challenge for all of us. And I know that everyone on this panel is committed to reinvigorating and rekindling that sort of professional spirit. Is going to be very important. So on your behalf, I want to thank them very much for what they've had to say. Thanks a lot.